Welcome back to the MSU Deer Labs online seminar series brought to you by the Mississippi State University Extension Service and the Forest and Wildlife Research Center. I'm Bronson Strickland and I will be the presenter today. I'd like to also acknowledge my co-author, Steve Damaris, colleague of mine and co-director of the MSU Deer Lab. Today I want to focus on all of the aspects of getting a place prepared to plant for food plots. What are all the things you need to do ahead of time, planting equipment, etc. So that's really what this presentation is about, is the background and preparation for a food plot system on your property. So now you may be wondering, what exactly should I plant? And we try to keep things very simple, and we call it the 4 Ps. And that simply stands for production, protein, palatability, and price. Production from the standpoint is that you want to produce a lot of biomass with these forages. We certainly are going to recommend a forage that's going to produce hundreds, if not thousands, of pounds per acre versus a forage that produces very little. So the forage needs to produce a lot of biomass. Protein is really important. Probably gets the most attention, but don't forget about things like digestible energy as well. So protein is very important. It's often limiting in the environment with a lot of the naturally occurring forages, especially if you're not managing the habitat. So it's a really good way to boost the protein in deer diet quality. Palatability. Of course, a forage has to taste good or a deer is not going to eat it. So everything else goes away. It doesn't matter if it's high protein, doesn't matter if it's a high producing forage, it has to taste good. And then finally, price. We want things to be affordable, and we'll often look at a forage as pounds of production per acre per dollars. So what is a particular forage going to cost me to pay for the seed and then also to manage for it? So all those things play a really big role in a forage that we're going to look for and recommend: production, protein, palatability, and price. Okay, now let's review planting rates. One thing you have probably assumed, if you're just starting or you're new at this, is when you get a rate from a manual, from one of our publications, or wherever you're getting your seeding rate information, there's often some fine print there that says, let's take example something like crimson clover, and you're going to plant 25 pounds per acre. The assumption is you are planting pure live seed, 25 pounds of pure live seed, not necessarily 25 pounds of what is in the bag. So we have to account for the seed coating and the weight of the seed coating, and I'm going to work through an example to show you how that works in a moment. Lastly, more is not always better, but I would err on the side of planting a little more. What I always like to recommend is looking at the acreage of your plot, and when you're coming up with your planting rate, round up a little bit. I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying you need to plant double or triple. You know, if 10 pounds per acre is good, then 30 pounds per acre ought to be better. Not necessarily. And the bottom line with that is, when you have too many plants, it's like carrying capacity with a deer herd. Resources become limited, and it becomes diminishing returns in terms of how many plants and how much biomass can grow on that acre or on that acreage. So figure that out for yourself. You know, if you're on year 2, year 3, year 4 with a particular seed recipe for that plot, you just might want to figure out that maybe it's 1.5 times might work well for you, because let's say, for example, you have a really high deer density, and so you might want to add a little more seed. But again, I'm not in any way saying do 3 or 4 times that amount, but if you're gonna deviate a little bit from the prescription, I would err on the side of planting a little bit more. This is why pure live seed is such a big deal. If you have never looked at the tag on a seed bag, or just didn't have anyone explain it to you, I know for years and years I was never aware of this. I just always assumed if I bought a 50-pound bag of seed, I was getting 50 pounds of seed. That is not the case now. And this is mainly due to a lot of the seed coating that goes on. Remember, we were talking about inoculating legumes, is that within that seed coating very often is going to be that inoculant. So I'm not saying this is all bad, but what I'm saying is be aware of the pure seed or pure live seed amount that is on the bag. So if you look at this, it may be kind of shocking. I know it was a jaw dropper for me the first time I saw it. Only 49, let's round it up to 50% of the weight of this bag of seed is actually seed. Another 50% is inert matter. And then let me point you towards this as well. The germination rate is only 85%. So you cannot have the expectation that if you bought a 10, 20, 50-pound bag of seed, that it's all seed. All of these little things are diminishing the amount of viable seed that is going to respond and hopefully germinate in a few weeks after you plant it. So here are the steps you would take to figure out how much actual seed you have in the bag that you bought. So if we want to find out pure seed, the example I had was a 50-pound bag. I'm going to multiply the 50 pounds times the pure live seed rate or percentage. So I'm going to multiply 50 times 0.4988, which yields 24.94. So think about that. 50-pound bag, only 24.94 pounds of it are actual seed. Now we have to account for the germination rate. Most of the time, if the seed is not old, the germination rate is going to be pretty high. I think 0.85 is pretty normal. I've seen it up to 0.9, 0.95, but we still need to account for it. So now we have 24.94 pounds of seed times the germination rate, 0.85, equals 21.2 pounds. So 50-pound bag of seed is yielding, under these conditions, these rates, 21.2 pounds of seed. So you need to understand that and account for that. So if you are needing to plant, let's use an easy example, I want to plant 20 pounds of seed per acre. You're essentially going to have to use that entire 50-pound bag to get the 20 pounds of actual pure live germinating seed into your food plot. What are the most common reasons for a food plot failure? And let me tell you, I have experienced every one of these firsthand, and I've worked with a lot of other people that have experienced these firsthand as well. As we have talked about many times, the seed bed. So ensuring you have a good seed bed and seed soil contact is critical. The right planting techniques, which again goes into a poor seed bed typically, but it's using the right technique to ensure the soil is in good condition, the seed is at the proper depth, that it's not too shallow, that it's not too deep, etc. Getting the soil pH, fertilizer problems. You will often see that people will fertilize a food plot, but they won't address the pH problem. So as you know, you're wasting fertilizer, and in many cases, you're not going to get a good stand without the balance of both of those. Weed problems, not as much of a problem if you're only hunting over a cool season food plot. But as we spoke about in the herbicide section, it becomes a big deal when you're concerned about forage production in the springtime. You know, the example being our grass is going to take over those clovers, and especially it will be a problem. No ifs, and, or buts about it. It will be a problem with warm season plantings, addressing the weed issues. Having a plot that is too small, and you can look at this as two different ways. Of course, we always recommend putting an exclusion cage on a food plot so that we can monitor the production of the plot, and we can also monitor the consumption of the plot. When a plot is too small, you're going to notice that there's very little production after, say, 6 weeks or so. As soon as the deer find the plot, there's going to be hardly any biomass that's produced. Literally, I have been called out and visited properties where the landowner or leaseholder thought that their food plots were failing, that they did something wrong. They weren't seeing this nice stand of biomass, and it's simply because the food plot was too small, or you could look at it this way, or they had too many deer relative to the food plot acreage. So in that case, you have to either increase food plot acreage or decrease the amount of deer that are consuming those food plots. And lastly, nobody is perfect. Random chance, Mother Nature. It's happened to us many, many times where we got too much rain or didn't get enough. Things like that that you cannot control, and you can't beat yourself up about it, because if you plant food plots enough, that is certainly going to happen. Along with a soil test, an exclusion cage, in my opinion, is money well spent. You've done all this work, you've prepared the food plot, you've had the soil test, you've amended it, you've paid for the seed, you've planted it, and now you really don't have a way to gauge production or how successful the food plot is. An exclusion cage, very simply, some type of fencing. You want to have it at least 5 foot high, and whether you use a couple T-posts or rebar, whatever means that you can think of to exclude deer from a small part of the food plot, you can learn so much. If you'll notice on the this figure on the left, just look at the outside of the plot versus what is in the exclusion cage, and look at the drastic difference. If you were to walk up to this plot without the cage, you're going to make a lot of assumptions that the planting rate wasn't right, the fertilization wasn't right. You're going to come to a lot of different conclusions, except that you did everything right. If you look at the forage inside of the cage, you notice a really good stand, really good production. And the bottom line here is we've got, at least on this plot, this part of the property, there's just too many deer relative to the amount of food plot acreage. And so this just really can tell you so much. Cages can be used year after year after year. So it's a one-time investment, and it's not that big of an investment in the first place. So I highly recommend exclusion cages. Definitely needs to be part of your food plot management program.